welcome to Moonshots MLB. For those of you that got the video from 2 weeks ago, welcome back to Moonshots MLB. I'm Mike. I did the intro video a couple weeks ago. Really wanted to explain, kind of showcase and highlight some of the tools, the features, just the general usage of the site, kind of where we came from, where we're going, and what we're all about. So hopefully you caught that. It was a little long, but I think it was well worth the time. Give it a listen if you haven't. Give it a look. Share it, subscribe, whatever else goes along with these YouTube videos. I'll do my best. I'm not a content creator guy, so I'll do my best to kind of explain, what we're trying to do here, especially with this one, with the projections and optimizer. Kind of, I'll explain the flow, the usage, point out some of the features. There's a lot of filtering options. We'll kind of go through it from top to bottom. Then we'll optimize some lineups. Let's get going. Projections page. So when you land on this page, what you see here, you've got some basic filtering. Pretty straightforward, right? So you've got the team icons. So if you want to filter out by teams, we certainly can. And click Cubs. I see the Cubs, Mariners, and so on. I'm going to clear that filter by clicking all teams. That resets it to our default state, showing all the teams. Got our position filters here, so I want to see all pitchers. I can click the P for the pitchers, just shortstops, outfielders, maybe all the hitters, and then clicking back to all will give me all of the players, pitchers, and hitters in our view. Another thing you'll notice here too is we got a section or a header grouping for Draftkings, and the projected points for DK, their salaries, positions, and so on. Same goes for FanDuel. So our projections are for Draftkings and FanDuel. And we'll get into this, selecting the slate here in a moment. I'll kind of show what happens to the grid when you do that. It narrows your focus down on whether it's DK or FanDuel slate that you might have selected, and then some additional options for filtering and whatnot. So kind of moving across the grid here, we've got some other fields that I want to point out. So the game time. This is a link that takes you to the matchup. So I'll click that and kind of show you that here real quick. We won't go into this in great detail, but at least wanted to show you, what the page is, and running kind of slowly here again with my camera setup. Okay, there we go. A little bit of a lag. All right, so we've got the pitcher, the splits, lefty, righty, and then lineup. So that's what that link will take you to. Very cool page, a lot of cool, interesting information and features on there. Back to the projections, we've got the pitcher, which is a link to their player page, their team. We've got the home plate umpire for that day, and then our points distribution for DraftKings. We don't have FanDuel in here. Not sure if we will. But for now, we do have the DraftKings points distribution, so it's pretty easy to see. If you want to look at all of the hitters, I can click hitters and then just sort. Click that header a couple of times. I can see the points distribution for all of the hitters. That had the highest distribution within the 20 to 25 point DK range, for example. Okay, so kind of cool. You can kind of see there, the distribution across all of the players, including pitchers and hitters. We'll come back to the projection grid and show some more functionality, but let's move on down the page here and look at stacks. So here's our stacks for the day. What we'll do is maybe we'll select a slate here, because I want to show you. What you'll notice is kind of up top too, we've got we have the same here, the DraftKings grouping and a FanDuel grouping. Now, maybe you're interested in the DraftKings 8-game slate, so I'll select that, and then that'll collapse or hide those FanDuel columns, because I don't want to see those. I want to see the DraftKings for this particular slate. Here's our 16 teams for that 8-game slate. We've got our expected home runs. So this is kind of cool, because this is based on our projections. The expected home runs for that 9-man projected lineup or confirmed lineup. So you can kind of get an idea of like what lineup is in the best position for maybe the most power or most home runs for that particular day. The average points for that 9-game or that 9-man lineup. Average dollar for that lineup and points per dollar and so on. And that's for your 5-man, 4-man, and 3-man stacks too. So we take the top 3, top 4, or top 5 guys in that lineup, and kind of show them here, aggregate them here, so you can really see which maybe 3, 4, or 5-man stack might be most appetizing on that particular slate. Moving on down, daily launch menu, very popular tool, feature that we had last year. This is our top home run calls for the day based on a number of factors within our projections. Seemed to be a big hit. There were some nights that were pretty incredible. As it goes with baseball, some nights not so much, but overall, this was a huge success. The high level of confidence if you're doing not just DFS, but also home run bets. So we're going to have the DK odds pulled in here too from the sports book, so you'll be able to see the odds for those home run props, for those player props for those guys. That'll be pulled in. Same with the Whiffers row. So this is our expected strikeouts for all the pitchers on the slate. Also with this DK Sportsbook data being fed in, we'll have the the line, the over/under odds and whatnot. So and same with Price Picks. So we'll have the over/under for the or the more or less, I think it is called, for Price Picks for their expected strikeouts for those pitchers. As I mentioned, we'll circle back up to the top. Let's get back up to this projections grid, and we'll set this back to default, because I want you to kind of see what happens when you select a slate. So as we see here, we've got those team icons as filters. As I mentioned, we get the positions as filters. As I mentioned, I'm going to pick that 8-game slate again. It gives us a nice player pool to work with. And so what happens here is I've had my filters kind of change based on the teams that are part of that slate. I've also got some new filtering buttons here, quick filters, so I can see who my active player pool is, who did I exclude, and who have I locked, as well as salary sliders, so I can adjust I can kind of see my player pool based on my salary constraints, my low or high, and then an export here. This is the export that's used for Fantasy Cruncher. So once you have your player pool set, you click that, you get your spreadsheet that you would download and then subsequently upload directly into Fantasy Cruncher to use there. So with the player pool here, let's maybe kind of run through a quick scenario, and then we'll go over and optimize these lineups. So let's say, for example, I want to exclude Patrick Corbin, probably for obvious reasons. Okay, I don't want him in my lineup, so he's excluded. Okay, so I just click that green check mark. So that green check mark means they're part of my active pool. Let's say I also don't want Will Smith, I don't want Sean Murphy, or I don't know, Zach Davies. Okay, so now I've got those guys in my excluded player pool. A couple other ways to exclude players without going through and finding them one by one. Let's say, for example, I don't want any Cubs in my player pool. I can click the Cubs icon here, filters those Cubs hitters out, and the pitcher, all of them. I can click this green check mark at the header level. It'll remove all of those Cubs from my active player pool, and it has them listed here in my excluded players. And I'm only seeing the Cubs here. You're probably like, well, what happened to Patrick Corbin and those other guys? Remember, we've got the filter set on the Cubs, so I can either go here, click the team header, and select all, and I'll see those guys from the other teams. So I had someone from the A's represented, the Diamondbacks, Dodgers, Nationals, and so on. Or I can just click all teams, and that'll refresh my grid. So let's go back here, excluded players. Here they are. Now, locked players, don't have anybody locked just yet. Actually, circling back to, let's go back to our excluded players here for just a quick moment. If I wanted to restore a player, let's say Zach Davies, we'll put him back in. I can click the green arrow, put them back in my active pool. Will Smith, put him back. If I want to restore all of them, I can click this at the header level, and it'll put them all back in my active player pool. Okay, now another way I can exclude the entire team is over here in our optimizer section. So if I want to exclude those Cubs, I can just click the Cubs here where it's green. That'll turn to kind of a transparent gray, indicating that team's been excluded. Let's say I don't want any Diamondbacks, and I also don't want any A's or Rangers. Instead of clicking each of those teams, I can exclude that entire game by clicking that green check mark next to the game, and that'll just remove both of those teams at once. If I want to put the Diamondbacks back in, I can click their team again. Now they go back to green, indicating that they're part of the, they've been added back to the player pool. Okay, so I've got some excluded players here. 30. My active player pool is at 130. And now let's lock in a couple of guys. So I want to lock in Corbin Burns as a pitcher. He's my SP1, and then we'll lock in Vlad Guerrero. So I've got a pitcher locked, and I've got a first baseman locked. And before I want to generate these lineups, let's say I also want to do a Blue Jay stack. I don't care what other Blue Jays I get. I know I want Vlad as a locked player, and give me say 3 other Blue Jays. So what I can do over here is there's an icon, maybe a little difficult to see, I guess, admittedly with the color theme here. Is next to the team there's like a stack icon. So if I want to stack 4 Blue Jays, I would click that 4 times. It's just going to cycle through 1 through 4. Now I could go up to 5 for Draftkings and then 4 for FanDuel. So I've got a 4-man stack. For Toronto, it's going to include my locked Vlad Guerrero. I've also got Corbin Burns locked as my pitcher. And maybe also, let's do since I've got Corbin Burns as my SP1, let's also lock in a couple of Brewers. So I've got 2 Brewers. I click that stack icon twice for 2. 4 Brewers, or sorry, 4 Blue Jays. Let's generate, I don't know, 15 lineups, and max exposure, put that at 90%. We'll leave it at 50,000 as total salary. We'll restrict batter versus pitcher. Now in a smaller slate, maybe it makes more sense for you to maybe consider, letting your hitter face your pitcher. Perfectly fine. You just uncheck that if that's what you wanted to do. One thing I want to point out over here too is before we jump over to the optimizer, you saw some of the filtering, including just this slider, which is pretty straightforward with the salary. 2 things to point out. Your player pool is going to be whatever's in your active pool. Now, just because I have somebody filtered out does not mean that they're excluded. Okay, so as you're filtering, keep that in mind. Filtering does not mean excluding. Okay, so if you want to not have a player or a group of players part of your player pool, you need to deliberately exclude them, not just filter them out. Another thing is, as you're doing a lot of filtering, you can get into some pretty interesting states. Filtering states, meaning if you have a number of different filters going with sorting based on team, position, salary, kind of keep that in mind. It's easy for the grid to kind of get lost on where it's at, or maybe even use the user to kind of get lost on where you're at with your sorting, with the filtering. A lot's happening here. There's a lot of, I guess, dynamics with the filtering. You have a lot of options, and so it's pretty easy to kind of get lost on what your player pool is, and then what your excluded players are. We saw that before when I excluded some guys and went to the Cubs, and we didn't see those other ones, right? So keep that in mind as you're going through this, that you may have some situations where your filters are maybe hiding some of the players that you would expect to be seeing. So maybe kind of tweak with your filters a little bit, kind of get accustomed to it. There's a lot functionality there, so keep that in mind. All right, back over to generating lineups. So we've got our 2 stacks, we've got a locked pitcher, and we've got some constraints set here. So I'm going to generate lineups. Click my generate lineups button. It's going to launch a new browser tab. And within a few seconds here, we should have our 15 lineups. One thing to point out here too is when you run this for the first time, so let's assume you're running this early in the morning, you get up and you want to run some lineups. The very first time you run this will take longer. It's loading all of those scripts up into memory, and it will take a bit longer the first time you run it. Second thing I want to mention here is if you're going to run 150 lineups, that's fine. Go make some coffee, come back to your desk. They'll be ready for you. It will take between a minute and 2 minutes typically for 150 lineups. Obviously not ideal, but this is certainly geared towards those that want to run 10, 20 lineups. maybe upwards of 40 or 50. If you got a few seconds to just be patient, let the thing do its work, and you'll have those lineups spit out as quickly as it possibly can. So there's not tons of bells and whistles here. It's not intended to be the gold standard, but I think it definitely serves its purpose for some of the smaller entry folks. So what we have here is we've got our 15 lineups. Here's our tab. It's got 15 up here. So if you had made multiple runs of projected lineups or optimized lineups, you would see like maybe you had one for 15, one for 10, one for 50, one for 12. So it's kind of easy to kind of find those as you're going across your tabs if you have multiples open. Now what we have here in our constraints, our settings. Now these are what we set back on the projections. We can adjust those here. So our max exposure, if we wanted to change that, regenerate lineups, we could do that directly from this page. If we wanted, instead of 15 lineups, we wanted 20, we could do that right from this page, and so on. Now we've got our player exposure here. We had 130 players in our player pool. It used 26 of those, and here's who they used and the exposure of those based on our setting of 90%. So it did its best to keep at that 90% threshold based on 15 lineups. Obviously with math, it can be difficult to do until you have like many more lineups to generate. So another thing we can do here is remove some of these lineups. Click the red trash can. That'll remove these from your export. If you were to export these out, we've got our indicators. So we've got our two players that were locked, Corbin Burns and Vlad Guerrero. And here's our 4-man Blue Jay stack. And here's our 2-man Brewer stack. You can see that kind of represented through each one of these lineups. And then what I can do is click Export Lineups. That'll generate the export in the format that's required to upload into Draftkings or FanDuel. If these were FanDuel lineups, same thing. So this is built for Draftkings and FanDuel with the appropriate formatted spreadsheets that would be uploaded into those respective sites. Another thing to point out here as well is if we want to change your player pool or the locks or the stacks, you go back to your projections and do that. This is where you'd manage your player pool, your stacks, your locks. That is not done from the optimizer page itself. But like I mentioned, if you want to do some different things here, I can change my 15 lineups to 20 lineups, and then put my exposure back to 100, and maybe change my total salary to 49.5. Click Generate Lineups, and then within a few seconds, I'll have my 20 lineups without having to go back to the projections and doing any sort of manipulation there. I wanted to keep my player pool intact, my locks, my stacks intact, and then just generate some new lineups directly from this page here. Okay, so now here's my 20 lineups. And another example, maybe this will run a little faster. On this one, I'll set it to 6 so you can kind of see this. Switch this to night mode as well, the dark mode, which also is kind of nice looking. There we go. All right, so that is projections and optimizer. Thank you for listening. Any questions, comments, thoughts, ideas? Send them my way. Thank you.